Our scripture tonight comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home, humbled themselves. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. This is the word of God for the people of God.
I like to listen to the Moth Radio Hour. Have you heard of the Moth Radio Hour? It's on public radio on Saturday mornings. And it's basically it's an hour handed over to storytellers. And they go around the country and they have what they call these story slams. And people show up and they tell stories. And the stories that are told very well and are very powerful then get chosen to be on the radio. And I was driving from Bowling Green back to Perrysburg yesterday morning after my antibiotic fix for the day. And one of these stories came on. And it was a woman by the name of Marcia. She lives in Maine. And she told this story about how when she and her husband and her two kids bought a farm, they moved in and she hadn't realized until she got settled, and she looked out the house, the windows in the back, from the back porch and everything. That pond was prominent. No matter where she went in the house, looking out the back, she'd see that pond. And that pond all of a sudden conjured up all sorts of stuff. Some really dark stuff, some really tragic stuff that happened to her when she was a child. And so at first she talked to her husband, we need to do something to cover it up. Now, how do you cover a pond? So they were looking at putting a hedge around it or building a tall fence around it. Finally, she had the sense to realize that maybe what she should do is deal with what it is that pond was reminding her of. And so she told this story that her parents moved them out to a farm when she was 6, and she had a younger sister, 3. And one day, her mother was busy cleaning up the house because her father's parents were coming for a visit. And I remember those moments when my parents were coming to the visit, and the stress and tension and fraught that gave my wife. You know the old saying is, if you talk about mother-in-laws, I've never experienced a situation where a mother-in-law and a son-in-law have much problems, but I have experienced over the years of my job the mother of the groom and the daughter-in-law. There's a tension there sometimes. And so she was just really frantically cleaning things up, and so she said she sent us out, us girls out to play. And so she went to her favorite spot, which was a loft in the barn, and she climbed up the ladder, and she sat in that loft, and then a few minutes later she heard her 3-year-old sister cry out, can you help me up the ladder so I can be up there with you? And, you know, she didn't want the sister around. That happens. 6-year-olds don't want their 3-year-olds following them around. And so she said, no, you go out and do something else. A little bit later in the morning, she said her mother called. The grandparents were here. but there was no sign of her sister anywhere. The family went looking, and they found her face down in the pond with a little red boat that she was playing with. She had drowned. And so this woman named Marcia talks about that for the rest of her life she has lived with this. She's always thought, my gosh, if I would have just been decent that day, if I would have done the right thing, if I would have helped her up the ladder, we could have played together, this tragedy wouldn't happen. Her parents, as is often the case, got a divorce after the tragedy. And she says, that would never have happened. And all these years, I have just been carrying that guilt of my lack of desire to take care of my sister with me. And so when they moved into this farm and that pond, all that stuff just sort of come up. Decades later, the scars, the pain, the guilt. So she decided to go talk to her mom about it. She said she and her parents never talked about this ever. The whole family just sort of tapped it down. And when she went to her mother, she says, you know, I just want to tell you, I feel so responsible. That she told the whole story of how the 3-year-old wanted to come up in the loft with her and she wouldn't do it. And then she went out and got her. And she was crying as she was telling her mother this and was asking her mother's forgiveness. And her mother sitting there shaking her head. She says she's shaking her head. She says, no, 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 no. This is not your fault. You didn't cause this. It's my fault. Because after she came in from the barn, she wanted to play. And I gave her the boat, told her to go out and play in the pond. If I wouldn't have been so obsessed about getting the house clean. And then this mother started to spill her story. The decades of guilt, pain, being tapped down, suddenly flowing out in this conversation. So then, Marcy decided to go see her father. And then she told her father how she felt, that it was her fault. And then she told her father that her mother, his ex-wife, said no, it was her fault because she pushed the little girl out of the house with the boat in hand. And the father started shaking his head and said, no, 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 it's not either one of yours. I was the last person to see her alive. I was watching her play down there. I thought for a moment that maybe I should stop doing what I was doing and go down and play with her, be with her for a little bit. But I was so busy. And there are 3 lives. Spent almost 3 decades of their lives beating themselves up over a tragedy. And because they never talked about it, and because they kept trying to own the cause of it, each to themselves, they carried this tragedy heavily with them. And then Marcy said, this whole conversation that should have happened years and years and years ago, as she talked with her mother, as she talked with her father, as they talked about each other, something became very apparent. That the love between them all was still deep. The love was so deep. And in the conversations that became very, very apparent. And for the first time 3 of them are beginning to find a measure of peace. I don't know if this Marcy is a religious person. She never mentioned God at all. But she talked about love in a way that is very reminiscent of the way we talk about it in the church. This whole sense of a grace that is forgiving and restoring. This gift that God is so generous in sharing and can make all the difference in the world when we deal with very difficult things as to whether or not we're going to live our life with a sense of joy and purpose, or we're going to live our life under a shroud or a pall of doubt and self-hatred. This grace, this love, we see it in the gospel lesson. Jesus tells this parable of 2 guys sitting in temple, sitting in church. And one says, I'm glad I'm not like that guy. I am successful. I live my life righteously. I'm generous to the church. I do everything I'm supposed to do. And then there's this other guy sitting there, and he's just beating himself up because he has done things, he has felt a sense of guilt because of those things, and he doesn't feel a sense of worthiness. And Jesus says, one of those 2 are going to walk out of the temple, find their way home, and discover they belong. And it isn't going to be the arrogant one. It's going to be the one who's willing to face his guilt and his pain. You know, there are people that are not very good at self-awareness. And I suspect the guy sitting in the church pew that was telling the world that he's perfect is one of them. I once had a parishioner who had a hard time with self-awareness. And she'd get herself in these jams and these troubles, and she'd come and see me. And I tried to help her understand how she was doing it. Then she'd get mad at me and she'd leave. And one day she walked into my office and she said, all 4 of my doctors have dropped me. Why? She says, they are upset with me. Why? He said, well, they heard that I had 4 lawsuits going on. And they decided I was too much of a risk, and so they dropped me. And I said, well, maybe you ought to be thinking about whether or not she's one of those persons who sued lots of people. You know, and I'm sitting here thinking, I better watch myself or I'm going to get sued here. And I said, well, maybe that's a concern they have. And then she looked at me and she said, but I'm not suing anybody. Well, I know you've heard 4 lawsuits. She says, no, I'm not doing it. My lawyer is doing it. You know? And sometimes people have problems with self-awareness. But those who don't have a problem with self-awareness, those who are reflective and ponder what's going on in their interior life, will have moments where they might feel less than honorable or carrying a load of guilt about something. And find themselves opening their heart to God because there's no other place to go. I've had numerous people in my career come in and see me, and very active in the church, very faithful in the church, very lovely people. And then I'll shut the door in the office and they say, these people don't know me. They think I'm this really nice person, but I'm not. I'm a horrible person. And then they'll just tell their story. And sometimes he'll tell a story to look at that, I'm going, that's not really a big deal. But it's a big deal to that person. And so I listen to the story, and well, 9 times out of 10, it's usually in relationship to marriage and divorce issues. But and then with tears flowing down their face, they'll say, I just wish I could do something to be loved by God, to be accepted by God, because I want to be a disciple. I can remember one saying that so clearly to me. And I said, but you are loved by God. But you are a disciple of Christ. But there is a place for you, not made with hands, but eternal in the heavens. But she said, well, what about this? And this is something that happened 30 years earlier. I says, oh, come on. This is the gift that God gives us. This gift of lifting us up in our moment of despair, of reminding us that we matter, of telling us that even when we stray and stumble and trip, at the end of the day, God still sees us as a blessing, that we belong to God. And it is that gift that helps us move on to the next time we stop, and the next time we struggle. But it helps us move on, and move on with a sense of peace and a sense of hope. And in a few moments, we'll be baptizing Jacob Christopher. And he was so anxious to come to life, he came out two months early. You know? Just barreling his way into life. And the thing about him as he grows up, he's going to be the cutest, sweetest little boy you'll ever want to meet. And he's going to be the little hellion that's just going to get in all sorts of trouble. And that's because that's what kids do, you know? And he's going to be loved forever. And when he finds himself in trouble, God's going to be there for him, to love him, forgive him, find a path towards restoration. And that's what we tell the world when we baptize him. He is loved. And there isn't anything he will ever be able to do that will change that. Know that you are loved.